Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Community Solar Energy Sovereignty Grant Program's second TA session. This session is designed for organizations who are interested in applying for the Community Solar Energy Sovereignty Grant Program. So if that is you, you are in the right place. My name is Christine Flynn. I'm a research associate for the Center for Governmental Studies at Northern Illinois University. And our team, along with a collaboration of other universities here in Illinois, are providing support to all of the CEJA programs, including those at DCEO. So I'm excited to be here with you. I now want to invite my co-facilitator, Aaron, to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Aaron McAvoy, and I'm the grant manager. And as Christine indicated, I work for DCEO and the Office of Energy and Business Utility. And I will be assisting you when it comes to going through this grant, and then also the technical assistance later on if you need it when you have some questions and things like that. And then I will turn it back to Christine to share a little bit more about the other members of our team.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. So we are also joined by two members of our kind of university collaborative, Devin Day, who is the engagement and program specialist for the Smart Energy Design Assistance at University of Illinois. He's going to be our chat monitor for today. So he'll be interacting with you all as you have questions, as well as Abby Bethke, who is the data and reporting coordinator, also from the Smart Energy Design Assistance, at the University of Illinois. She will be helping us with links and then also be helping us with chat monitoring a little bit later on in the presentation. So we are excited to have them and appreciate their support to make this a successful presentation today. Now, before we jump in, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So this session is being recorded. This session and any of the technical assistance sessions for any of the CEJA grants are available on their NOFO websites. The link for the Community Solar Energy Sovereignty Grant NOFO website is going to be placed in the chat for you. That is where you will find this recording and slide deck after the presentation today. I also want to just go over some Zoom basics. So many of you might already be familiar with Zoom, but just in case you are not, you do have the ability to mute or unmute yourself, stop or start your video. You can raise your hand if you have a question. You can also add an emoji into the chat or our video screens here if you would like to do that. And then you also can use the chat feature. So we do ask that during the presentation you remain muted. If you have questions, please place them in the chat, and Devin or Abby will ask that question on your behalf during our kind of designated Q&A portions. Towards the end of the session, though, we will have an opportunity for you to unmute if you would like to and have a little bit more of a conversation. But throughout the presentation, we just ask that you please remain muted just so we can make sure we get you all the content that we have planned for this afternoon. Now, I would like to just get a little bit of a survey to see who we have in the room with us today and what kind of background information you have. So if in the chat, you can just put, if you attended the Bidders Conference, which was our last TA session. I'm just looking through the chats. I agree, Katia. Devin is awesome. All right, so it looks like we have a good number of people who did join us. Some people who are brand new to the opportunity. Okay, great. Well, great. Well, that recording and slide deck are available on the NOFO website. but we will be reviewing some of the information that we went through in that bidders conference today. So if you weren't able to make it, don't worry. You are not behind. We will be spending some time going through kind of the basics of this grant opportunity today. So let's go through our presentation overview. So we are going to start by discussing the foundational legislation, so the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which we often refer to as CEJA. We are then going to move into an overview of this grant opportunity, discuss required application documents. Then we're going to talk about some tips for submitting an effective application package. So this is kind of taking a deep dive into how to make your application as successful as possible. We'll talk about the merit review process, so the actual evaluation process that takes place once you submit your application. And then we'll finish out with some support and resources. So how you can get support during this process and what resources are available to you so that you can make your application strong. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it off to Aaron, who's going to kick us off for the day.
All right, very good. So let's get started. And as Christine said, we're going to have a discussion about the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or the CEJA legislation. So what is Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA? It's a comprehensive landmark energy legislation in Illinois that centers equity and puts Illinois on track to achieve 100 renewable energy by 2050. And as you can see in this pie chart, it encompasses a lot of different aspects of workforce and business development. And we'll be talking about those today. But I want you to look at the pie chart and see that the CEJA legislation included a lot of the different energy access and points. For example, it includes renewable energy components, energy efficiency components, how we're going to get to carbon-free power as a state. It includes funding for electric transportation. And then finally, it supports for fossil fuel workers and their families. But again, we're going to focus on this orange. And if you're from the Texas or something, or know about, or like UT, it's kind of that burnt orange. Equitable workforce and business development. Okay. So how is CEJA going to achieve all this? So this is the DCEO portion of the CEJA ecosystem. And as I mentioned earlier, there are just an array of programs that were developed or expanded under the CEJA legislation, which spans multiple state agencies. But on this screen, again, we're just going to focus on what the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity are responsible for. Overall, the expectation of the legislation is that this ecosystem is going to benefit communities and groups of people throughout the state with a specific focus on the Restore, Reinvest, and Renew, or R3 communities, and also the environmental justice communities. So on this screen, you're going to see, again, the DCO CEJA ecosystem. On the top left are the contractor support programs. Below that are the economic development and environmental justice programs, including our solar energy sovereignty program. And also I want you to pay attention, and I'm not going to point out every single one, but below each one, how it's named, you can find out how much money is allocated to those programs per year. So keep that in mind. And then over on the right side are the workforce training and support program grants. And in the bottom right there are some commissions and councils established under CEJA. So on the next slide, we're going to kind of zoom in on and talk about the two programs that make up the Jobs and Environmental Justice Program. All right. So again, Jobs and Environmental Justice Grant Program. If you want to know where it is in the legislation, it's in Section 5-60. So all of the programs within the Economic Development and Jobs and Environmental Justice Grant are administered by this office, the Office of Energy and Business Utility. However, only those that are highlighted in the green are part of the Jobs and Environmental Justice Grant Program, which formed two sub-programs, the Equitable Energy Future Grant and the Community Solar Sovereignty Grant. And in a way, I kind of call them, they're kind of sister programs, especially for those of you that are familiar with the Equitable Energy Futures Grant. You're going to find a lot of similarities, and I'll get to those a little bit later. But there are also some differences too. So I think that's important to note. All right. I should point out, kind of give a plug here, that both programs, the Equitable Energy Futures and of course the Community Solar Energy Sovereignty, are actively accepting applications. And so with that, I don't want to get too far off track with the Equitable Energy Futures Grant, but just know that that grant is definitely looking for more applications, successful applications for that too. The main thing with both of these programs is that we're ensuring that the communities have access to the upfront capital needed to develop or advance renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. And again, this grant is designed to provide seed funding and pre-development funding opportunities for equity eligible contractors. Again, both of those are very important to remember and recognize. And there is a link that we can place in chat or later on that talks about the Equitable Energy Futures Grant Program if you want to look into that, as well as hopefully the Solar Sovereignty Program. And so with that, I've been concentrating and sharing all this information. I'm going to ask Devin if there are any pertinent questions that we should go through now, or should we hold them to wait until at the end of the presentation? I'll defer to you, Devin.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Actually, we don't have any questions yet, so I think we can move on ahead.
All right. I know there'll be questions, but we'll move on ahead. All right. So let's start getting into the details, the weeds, so to speak, of the Community Solar Energy Sovereignty Grant Program. All right. Here we go. So again, reminder, if you want to look at the legislation, it's Section 5-60. Okay. So what will the grant provide? It's intended to provide grants to plan, develop, and execute community solar projects. It's going to provide upfront capital to support the development of community solar projects and provide seed capital and pre-development funding to support community ownership and renewable energy projects. And then the why behind all this is to remove the barriers to projects, community and business development caused by a lack of capital. And then on the projects themselves, who's going to benefit? We want contractor businesses in historically disadvantaged communities to benefit, equity investment eligible communities to benefit, and low income households to benefit. So who is eligible to be an applicant? And I should say a lead applicant, because with the Equitable Energy Futures, community solar sovereignty is the same way when we want collaboration. There needs to be partnerships. There's a lead applicant and possibly some sub-recipients and things like that. So keep that in mind. I don't know who's all on the call, so to speak, but when you're looking at this, keep in mind that you might need to have some partners when you're putting this grant application together. So, okay, the three categories are community-based organizations, and I'll read how that is defined. The majority of the governing body and staff consist of local residents. The main operating offices are in the community. Priority issue areas are identified and defined by the residents. Solutions to address priority issues are developed with residents, and also the program design, implementation, and evaluation components has residents intimately involved in leadership positions. And then a public entity. The public entity must represent a municipality or county. Priority is given to proposed projects located and supporting an equity investment eligible community or communities and benefiting participating low income households. The public entity must certify that there are no local community-based organizations exist that can fill this role, and we'll get into that form a little bit later. And then the public entity must also provide the same showing of robust community engagement as a non-public entity would, so as that community-based organization would. And then finally, the other eligible applicant category is a technical support provider. Again, that technical support provider is going to have to provide and demonstrate all the robust community engagement and support that they have. But the main thing is, for many of you here, a technical service provider can be a solar supplier or installer or business involved in the field of solar energy. So keep that in mind. Again, all these three different categories and where you in particular might fit in, as well as who you might need to partner with. Okay, so for some, you might have heard about, or I mentioned about R3 communities, Restore, Reinvest, and Renew. Many refer to that as also the communities that were impacted by the marijuana or cannabis legislation a few years ago. And so that might, if you haven't heard of Restore, Reinvest, and Renew, or R3, if I mentioned about the Cannabis Act, many people go, oh yeah, I remember that. So priority projects are those that are in or support an equity investment eligible community. So keep in mind when you're putting together the grant, and the expectation that was built into this legislation and into this grant is that it will benefit communities and groups of people throughout the state, but want to focus on the equity investment eligible communities, the R3 communities, and then also the environmental justice communities. So on here, and then the R3 I mentioned about cannabis, but it was more than that. That community also was harmed by violence and excessive incarceration and economic disinvestment. An environmental justice community is one where residents have historically been subject to disproportionate amounts or burdens of pollution. And on here on this map, or on this slide, you can see Chicagoland, and then you can see Peoria. So everything in green would be affected, and part of those is where we would hope the projects would be able to help in those particular areas. And to help you out, and this could be posted in a chat, or when we send this to you, obviously you're going to have the slide deck. You'll see this at the bottom of the slide is a link to a map, to the maps, and you can plug in an address, and then you can find out what community are you eligible for, in the sense of, are you in an R3 community, the equity investment eligible community map, and things like that. So it's statewide, so it's just not Peoria, it's just not Chicagoland. Again, not sure where everyone is on the call, but there are definitely pockets of these communities across the state of Illinois, but not every place is that way. Okay, so there are two phases with the Community Solar Energy Sovereignty Fund. Oh, whoops. Yeah, there we go. So those include phase 1, which is planning and feasibility, and then phase 2, which is pre-development construction. And then some of you might be looking at this and seeing the arrow goes, wait a second, there's construction and implementation. Well, we don't fund construction or implementation, but we, as the Office of Energy and Business Utility, are going to work with the grantee and track through the construction and implementation phases to determine, if the grantee met their project objectives. We're starting from ground zero, or at the, I'll say sometimes at the cradle, and we, want to look at phase 1 and see all the planning and feasibility, and move to phase 2, which is all the pre-development and getting it off the ground, and then working with you with other financial opportunities that could be out there in the construction phase. And then finally, you electrified everything and it's been implemented. And so how are things going? How close were we, or you, to when it came to the feasibility and all that, because we're building all this from the ground up, literally, in this industry too. So you're going to hear from me multiple times. I talk about partnerships and collaborations with the subrecipients or others with your application. But I want to, and my director and others, obviously with the legislation itself and what the governor and the legislators put together, they want us as an agency and department to work and be a collaborator and partner with you as much as we can, within the law and ethics and things like that. We want you to be successful. We don't want any of these programs and applications to be unsuccessful. So we want to work with you and be a part of the process. And so that's why we're going to follow things out through implementation. Okay, so I mentioned phase 1, planning and feasibility. And then I also mentioned phase 2, pre-development construction. Is probably next slide. I want to provide some examples of both of those activities. So for phase 1, early stage project planning, project team organization, putting it together, site identification, organizing a project business model, initial customer outreach, preliminary site assessments, the development of the cooperative or the community ownership project models. Those are some of the things that could be part of planning and feasibility. And I emphasize some. These are just some examples that we have come up with, we've looked at, we've reviewed when it comes to the industry, and just also with these kind of projects. And then phase 2, pre-development construction. You're starting getting into procurement and contracting. securing the financing, you've already identified it in phase 1, so let's get that site controlled in phase 2. Again, some more customer outreach, but then also starting to get the enrollment of people, permitting and zoning, interconnection applications, the cost, the fees, the studies, the expenses, equipment and supplies. Again, that's pre-development construction. And we probably should take off construction because, to be honest, people, and no fault of their own, see construction and they go, oh, well, what about, you said construction, and it's pre-development. And I kind of want to emphasize that. And then start up with your staff and operation expenses. And I think also with that, I'm not trying to confuse things, but this is more of a tip than anything else. If you can clearly articulate, argue, however you want to define it, why one of these items in phase 2 should be in phase 1, feel free to do that and provide that information in your plan, in your narrative. And also keep in mind, you'll see this further along, you'll have a narrative sections in your application, but also there is narrative sections in your budget too. So budget is not just numbers. Obviously that's important, but there's a narrative under each tab that you can then articulate why you need, some of these figures and some of these dollars. And it's important for you to be able to share that information. So when the merit reviewers are reviewing your application, they are understanding completely, fully what you're trying to do. And if you can articulate some things like that on, well, this is not typically a phase 1 item. However, we get it. We understand based upon what you have told us. Again, no guarantees on that, but I'm just trying to, as a helpful tip here, provide some of that information. It's so key to clearly share your vision, your goals, your outcomes in the narrative, and take advantage of this. We were required by law actually to only have a simple 4-page application, but then there are some other documents that are required, and one of those is the budget template. So take advantage of that space that you have, again, to articulate your plan, and that will help you further along when it comes to articulating your plan to the merit reviewers. Okay, next slide. So we've talked about this, community solar, all that kind of stuff. So what are we getting at? What is a community solar project? And we at DCEO, with this grant, the Solar Energy Sovereignty Grant, we've adopted the U.S. Department of Energy's definition of a community solar project, which is any solar project or purchasing program within a geographic area in which the benefits of a solar project flow to multiple customers, such as individuals, businesses, nonprofits, and other groups. But however, as outlined in the NOFO itself, we're specifically looking for a type of community solar project that is community-centered and results in a community ownership model. And some people that might be familiar with this, it's also sometimes called community-driven. All right, next slide. So there are different types of community solar projects, and probably a lot that's been out there for probably the longest time is the traditional community solar project. And this is actually under Illinois Shines. They have 2 types of community solar projects. The first is a traditional community solar project, which is a solar project that might be located in or have connection to a subscriber's community. All right, next slide. The second type is, as I mentioned, is the community drive solar project. These projects provide more direct and tangible benefits, and I probably want to highlight or emphasize those two words of direct and tangible benefits to a local community, and most importantly, involve the local community in planning of the project and eventually ownership of the project. This is what we are striving for with this grant, and that's what we, as I said, emphasizing and receive the maximum amount of points when it comes to the merit review. So what this means is the outcomes of the projects needs to be direct, such as bill savings, direct income, job creation, and revenues from the project ownership. So again, keep that in mind as you're putting your plan together. Okay. So the next slide kind of emphasized what I just was talking about. Again, more direct and tangible benefits for the local community. The local community is involved in the planning and eventual ownership of it. So again, keep all that in mind. Next slide. Okay, community ownership. So that was kind of just brought up in the slides before. And so what does that mean? So it's an arrangement in which an electric generating facility is, or over time, will be in significant part owned collectively by members of the community to which an electric generating facility provides benefits. Members of that community participate in decisions regarding the governance, operation, maintenance, and upgrades of and to that facility, and members of that community benefit from regular use of that facility. And going on to the next slide. So the bullets on the screen here are based on criteria utilized by our friends over at Illinois Shine in relation to their community-driven community solar projects. And we'll post in the chat a link to the community-driven community solar Illinois Shines link. But you all can see what's on here. I'm not going to read everything, but I think the main thing is for the community benefits is providing a target percentage goal for ownership held by community members and or nonprofit organizations, and then outline direct benefits to the community. And then part of the plan that you should be putting together is describe how the community members, the nonprofits, and et cetera, will participate in the project organization, development, operations, and management. And then you can go to the next slide. Okay, so how's the funding going to be provided? You'll need to have as part of your plan of any project, you all should already know this, you'll need to have some milestones for your project. We'll be basing funding will be based on the established project milestones. Upfront funding is available, and then project milestones and upfront funding will be negotiated at the time of the grant agreement. So that there are some possibilities, but it's up for discussion, I guess is the way to to say that. So the next slide, please. So you saw earlier in a slide about phase 1 and phase 2. So funding phases. So you can apply for phase 1 only, phase 2 only, or phase 1 and phase 2. So if a grantee receives an award for phase 1 and phase 2, what we're going to do is review your phase 1 performance metrics, and we'll determine together whether you're going to receive funds for phase 2 activities. And I say together in the sense of it'll be a discussion on how we, if we can move forward to phase 2 or not. So I wanted to let you know that. And then if you went ahead and just applied for phase 2, you've already gotten everything done and for phase 1, and you're ready to move on to phase 2. You're still going to need to provide the appropriate phase 1 metrics for our merit reviewers to evaluate. So then we could provide you and say that you successfully provided us a phase 2 only application, and then we could negotiate from there. Okay. Next slide. So I'm going to fly through this real fast, just funding statistics. $8.5 million per year for this grant. We see that the awards can be as low as $50,000 up to $1 million per application. Based upon that, we anticipate probably up to 40 awards, but really it's up to the applications and up to successful applications if we have up to 40. But again, keep in mind the 8.5 million. And performance period, you could, the grant can be up to 4 years. And total per applicant. And keep this in mind, this is per applicant, not per application. You could have $3 million per applicant. And how that's going to work would be if you submitted multiple applications for a total of $3 million. So if you had 2 or 3, you'd had 3 different projects and each one of them was $1 million, just the simple math. But if you had a few more projects, but less than $1 million each. So just keep that in mind. But I will stress that it's per applicant, it's not per application. And there is no way around that of putting together an application that, asks for the $3 million. The max is going to be $1 million, but you could submit 3 different applications. So please keep that in mind. All right, next slide. I am, for the sake of time, going to skip the next 2 slides and actually go down to the questions and ask Devin, were there any questions that I need to answer now or we can hold off on?
Yeah, there were 3 or 4 questions. Why don't I introduce them and you can decide whether to answer them now or later. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, or I'll defer real fast to Christine. Should we, for the sake of time, move forward and ask the questions at the end?
So looking at the chat, it looks like a lot of these questions are related to the content you just went over. So why don't we do those now, just because they're still kind of relevant in the timeline at this point.
Perfect.
All right, so Lester Knighton asks, how do we accomplish an ultimately equitable, profitable business situation if the eligibility is limited to community-based organizations?
Wow, Lester, you put me on the spot already. I think, based upon that, like I said, it goes back to, and also, Lester, I think we met Tuesday. It goes back to those partnerships, and you have an idea and you have the wherewithal and you have the knowledge that a community-based organization probably doesn't have. And so we're finding that community-based organization and not calling anyone out, but that location that we were at on Tuesday, was, they were asking about, hey, they want to do some things. And so working with them, being the community-based organization, being that lead applicant, but then you have the wherewithal and the knowledge to of putting together and building the solar array, and that is how I would answer that question. I don't know if that gets to everything you wanted to know about, but if not, feel free to reach out to me. You have my information, and everybody else will too. So not playing favorites, but so yeah, I hope that helped, Lester. What's the next question?
So Waso out of soap. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. My apologies if not. Asks a couple questions. For an organization that has completed a significant portion of phase 1 activities and currently is working on phase 2 activities, can it apply for the outstanding phase 1 activities in addition to phase 2 activities?
I would say yes. And I think with that goes, the details would obviously be in your narrative of why you're applying for both. And I would say, as a kind of helpful hint to you and to others, is again, it goes to that narrative of sharing that information with the merit reviewers. It's so important, and I kind of stress that, where applications fail and overall in the grant process, not necessarily it would be for any DCO grant or any grant if you're applying for grants to anyone, any state agency or a private entity or a local, not, a local entity, is you have to be able to articulate, share your project, your program, your dreams, your ideas with them. They are not, or, this might sound crass, but they're not mind readers. And so you have to get that information out, and so people can understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, and then making sure finally that it aligns with the grant itself. And so in this case, aligns with the community solar sovereignty grant. And so with your question about portions of phase 1, make sure that you articulate and share, hey, we got all these parts of phase 1 done. We still need some help on these aspects of phase 1. And then also we've gotten a lot of phase 2 done, but we still need some help on these items for phase 2. And that's why we're asking for both phase 1 and phase 2. So again, I hope that answered your question. And if not, this goes for everyone and all the questions. You'll have my email address. Well, you should already have it because it's part of the NOFO and the CSFA, but it also will be at the end of this presentation as well. So any more, Devin?
Yeah, we've got a couple more. So also asks, does the project budget referred to in question 26 of the application document refer to the total budget cost estimate or the total amount the applicant is asking for under the grant?
I am going to somewhat defer this or have Christine correct me if I'm wrong. In the sense that the budget template, you should there should be a section where it deals with what you're asking for from this grant, but then there also should be sections where overall the project is going to cost X, Y, and Z, but you're only asking for X from DCEO. We need to understand, as much as you do already on the project, how much things are going to cost. However, don't, if you're putting together an application, you don't have to know everything and what the end result is going to be. And what I mean by that is, especially if you're in phase one only, um, you don't know if it's going to be profitable, or you don't know what else you need to do, kind of thing. So you're not going to know what your end project might look like. You have an idea, but you need to go through all the steps, go through all the different processes and approved items that are in phase one to get you to phase two, to then get you to the construction and implementation. So to answer your question more directly, I would put as much information as you have when it comes to the budget that you know about, um, and but then clearly delineate or have in the sections where what you're asking for the state funds for.
And if I could ask maybe a clarifying question here, Aaron, because I believe that question 26 in that fillable application document is referring to the uniform budget template. And I believe that uniform budget template is supposed to contain only the budget for the costs that are requested for the
Okay.
award. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Aaron, because I know we've been kind of developing the application on our end. But yeah, so question 26 is really focused on kind of understanding that cost efficiency, cost effectiveness. So really focused on the project funds that you're requesting. So that is kind of our attempt to understand what will the return on investment be for this project, looking at the project funds that you're requesting from the state. How are those funds going to be used efficiently and effectively to achieve kind of your overall return on investment for that project? I don't know if that really helped with clarification, but it's really focused on the project funds that you're requesting.
Right. So what Aaron said is true, that you will have an opportunity to share the total funding of the project, including construction costs, but that uniform budget template, as Christine stated, is really reserved for the funds that you're requesting for this particular grant opportunity.
Correct.
And that's what question 26 is getting at. Just one last question from Letty Velez. When does funding materialize after everything is awarded and signed?
Well, that is, as you said, after everything is signed, part of the agreement itself will determine if and how much money could be awarded up front, or if, and then how much money would be rewarded subsequently through reimbursement. So it varies. I'm not trying to be hesitant in the sense of it. Yeah, it's just going to vary by entity on how that would work. Still have to go through the procurement process and with the state and so forth. But I can't give you a specific, 30 days, no matter what, or 45 days and things like that. So it would not be right of me to do that. So, and I want to say as soon as possible, but as soon as possible, you can't define that really either. So as soon as we could get it to you, as as we could, is kind of really the best answer I can give you. But again, it's part of the negotiation process. If you, depending upon when you sign you are successful with your application and you sign the agreement, part of that agreement could be part of your negotiations to maybe get more money up front than you initially were thinking about, based upon some timing issues and things like that. But again, that would all be negotiated out.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So we kind of touched a little bit on the required application documents, but let's go through the list. So the uniform grant application, it's in a nice fillable PDF format. You need to complete the conflict of interest disclosure, mandatory disclosure. If the applicant is going to be a public entity, there's an attestation form that they're going to need to complete. We talked about the uniform budget utilization template. And then also there's the grant application template. And I want to remind everyone that all these documents that must be submitted, it's at a link that they'll probably put in chat, but you'll get it from this presentation. It's at the Community Solar Energy Sovereignty Grant Program on illinois.gov. So, all right. So the application package, some of the documents. Again, just kind of samples of kind of that front page of what they look like. Again, the uniform application for state grant assistance, conflict of interest disclosure, mandatory disclosures, and then again about the public entity. And I want to emphasize that all of this needs to be completed. There are no, you know, exceptions for, especially, you know, for any of these. So please keep that in mind. So the next slide talks about the uniform budget template. We kind of talked about that. Then there was the question 26 question. We'll talk about the budget a little bit later in the presentation, but then also keep in mind, I already talked about the importance of not just all the different tabs below on putting in the numbers, but also taking advantage of the opportunity that you can provide a narrative on why you need those funds and so forth, as well as it could be part of your application of why you need those funds maybe up front, help you with your argument for that. All right, next slide. So this is the application template. And we're going to kind of go through each page and then we'll see if we have any questions at the end of that. So page 1 is just your basic applicant information, but there are also some specific questions related to what kind of applicant you are. And again, you only need to complete the questions related to your applicant type. So only if you are a CBO or a public entity, technical support service provider. So one thing also that I want to note is something that we try to do with this application is you'll see on here, well, if you have really good eyesight, you can see that with each application question provides instructions on where the application information can be found in the NOFO. So, excuse me, as you can see on your screen, for eligibility, it can be found in the NOFO in Section C, Part 1, Subsection A. So this hopefully is helpful, and we are learning as we're working on these grant applications, and also we're listening. I think it's important to share that with you. You know, we listened after we did the Energy Equitable Futures, but we have to keep the current application out there. But we had some time to work on this Community Solar Energy Sovereignty application, and this is one of the things we heard, which is, you know, where is this information? And we're happy to provide it. Okay, so page 2, again, are all applicant questions. You start about the narratives, describe the community project, historical or future partnerships, the site and scope of the community projects, ownership model, local community benefits accomplished by the project. So again, this is where you're able to share your dream, share your desire, share the project with the merit reviewers. Excuse me. Okay, page 3. It kind of outlines those phase 1 and phase 2 activities. Also, are you going to sell any of your energy production and details for that? What kind of funding have you looked into and are leveraging? And then also what kind of partnerships you might have out there. So again, these are all things that you need to keep in mind as you're putting together your application, and know that these parts of the application, and we'll get into this a little bit further, are going to be scored and looked at. So keep that in mind. Excuse me. So finally, page 4. Remember I said that it's supposed to be a short application, and that was required by law. It's only 4 pages. So page 4 provides space to outline the project estimated timeline, the staff qualifications, the roles. If you already have staff on, and even your partners, things like that, please provide their bios and resumes. It's important. We have had to request those, and it's important to have that. If you don't have anyone hired for those roles, but you have an idea of what they're going to do, it would be nice to have something as robust as a job description, but I understand that might not be available for everyone. So the main thing would be is just providing kind of a list of their duties. Something could be simple as that, I guess is what I should say. Okay. So again, this is about the details. Also, some more of the details, how are you going to engage or work with other CEJA or FEJA programs? Also, the cost efficiency and effectiveness. This is kind of where the return on the investment. Excuse me if I didn't get the cough button fast enough. And then finally, keep in mind that the supplemental documentation is not going to be required by everyone, but I do want to call attention to it's very effective, and it provides some good background on your participation and your activity in the community. Would be letters of support, and those are just strongly encouraged. They're not required, but they help to demonstrate your organization's connections to the community, and that's really the important part of it, and can help you explain that portion of the grant application. And then so then finally, I'll defer to Devin real fast. If Devin, are there any questions related to what I just covered, or should we just go to Christine?
We don't have questions specific to what you just covered. We have generally just another question from us about community-based organizations and eligibility, and I was trying to double check that real quick, but since we have the opportunity, can that eligible organization, that eligible community-based organization, be a for-profit as well as a nonprofit organization, or is it just one or the other?
My understanding, and I will have to double check this, so don't hold me to this, everyone on the call and even the recording. We'll look into that to double check. I believe it's okay to have either one, but double check, and then we'll put that in the FAQs.
Yeah, and as we're moving on in your presentation, I'll take a look and see if I can put something in the chat. Christine, did you have something to add?
Nope, I just wanted to put up the language that's on the screen right now is the language that comes directly from the NOFO. So the definition of the community-based organizations is outlined in the NOFO, and it is specific. So please also Devin, thank you so much for looking at that over the next couple of minutes, but also there are specific definitions within the notice of funding that you can take a look at, and is likely where we will also look to get that answer. So I just wanted to put that out there.
And Wesso had an earlier question that I believe I addressed, and I just wanted to double check with you, Aaron. Can phase 1 or phase 2 activities that have already been completed be reimbursed with this grant? And I believe the answer is anything that occurred prior to the release date of the community solar energy sovereignty grant or NOFO is not eligible to be reimbursed. So if you incurred costs in your project prior to that date, they cannot be reimbursed, but during or anything after that release date of March 5th is potentially reimbursable. Is that correct, Aaron?
That is perfectly correct.
Awesome. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Aaron, for walking us through the Community Solar Energy Sovereignty Program, as well as kind of giving us details about the application package. We're now going to talk about tips for submitting an effective application package. So things to think about, resources to look at, where in the NOFO certain information is. So let's start with some program-specific application tips. So these have been compiled from our experience working with applications as grant writers, merit reviewers, funders. So these are going to be relevant, especially for this grant, but really for any grant that you are working on. So the first one is, if you make a claim, back it up with evidence. So this is just really making sure, if you are noting that there is going to be a specific outcome, make sure you're explaining how you arrived at that. So for CSES, if you're making a claim that there's going to be a certain number of households that benefit from your project, also explain how you determined that. How do you know that that number of households will be impacted or benefited by whatever your project might be doing? Next is include anticipated outcomes and how those outcomes were determined. So again, utilize data whenever possible. If you are making a claim, provide that data to back it up. So if you need to utilize, a labor analysis, if you're going to be talking about job creation, if you want to talk about documentation of need, look to census data. So this is data that merit reviewers are looking for. You're really telling them the story of your community. You're telling them the story of your project. So anywhere you can give them that backup information, it's going to really help your application stand out. Next is use any space that you can to provide as many details as you can. So as Aaron noted, the legislation dictated we could only have a 4-page application. So that means that there is some limitation on what information you could provide in that space. But keep in mind that you can provide supplemental documentation. You can add information to your budget narratives, especially if you want to be talking about any sort of analysis of how you arrived at your budget numbers, why you chose a certain contractor over another. That information can be included in your budget narrative and will be evaluated by those merit reviewers. So just keep in mind, wherever you can add information, please do so. The merit reviewers will look through that and they will factor that in. That also includes those letters of support that Aaron just talked about as well. So especially for this grant, you want to make it extremely clear how you are involved in your community. So what kind of community support, how will you be engaging the community and community members in your project? So implementation of your project, future management of the project, and what partners will you be engaging? Next up, we have don't make assumptions. So this is something that I know as a former grant writer, I fell into a number of times where I was so in my project. I knew my project so well. And I started to use jargon, or I started to make assumptions that other people were going to have information. It's so easy to do that. So my suggestion is really make sure you're not making assumptions, that the merit reviewers know your community, that the merit reviewers know exactly how your project is going to benefit that community. Anywhere that you can, again, tell that story, you want to do that. You are educating these merit reviewers on your community, on your project, on the benefit that your team is going to have through this project. And this one is really important because this project has 2 phases. But if you don't have all of the details, outline how your organization plans to gather that information. So phase 1, we know some of you are going to be looking at, is this project even feasible? That's the point of this funding. So you may be looking at it and saying, hey, you know what? Phase 2, those activities are really going to be based on what we think is going to happen in phase 1, but we're not exactly sure. That's okay. We want you to explain, this is what we're planning to do in phase 1. Here's our anticipated outcomes. This is what we think is going to be produced in phase 1. And based on that, this is what we're going to do in phase 2. And just acknowledge that that may need to change. And that's okay. That's part of kind of this phase 1 and phase 2. That's going to be part of that evaluation that Aaron mentioned during his section of, after completing phase 1, reevaluating, kind of seeing where phase 2 is going to go based on the results of phase 1. So if you don't have the details, that's okay. Be upfront. Say you don't have them, but this is how you plan to gather them. This is what you anticipate is going to take place. And then make your timeline clear. So the last thing you want to do is have your merit reviewers read, evaluate your application, and then walk away thinking, okay, but where are they in this project? Do they have the site? Do they not have the site? Are they still in negotiations for the site? You know, not really knowing where your project is at this time. Make sure that that is clear. Now, we have had some people submit, their actual kind of a Gantt chart showing us this is the timeline of how we're going to go through this process. They've provided us kind of month 1, month 2, whatever makes sense for you, how you're setting up the timeline. Please know you can outline that in the narrative of your application, but you also can provide supplemental documentation and just show us that timeline and make it clear where you're at. So I want to be kind of conscious of everyone's time. So this was going to be an activity where we kind of walked through and looked at how we can improve this claim. But I want to just show you kind of the results of what we were going to talk about. Is when you make a claim, make sure that that claim is specific and it's really communicating how your specific project is going to make an impact. So in this statement, this fictitious applicant said, this project will have tremendous benefits, will have a tremendous benefit to the community. That's great. But what we don't really know is what aspects of that project are going to have that impact. What does tremendous really mean, right? How much money will be saved? How many people or households will be impacted? Tremendous is subjective. The merit reviewers, one of them could read that and think, oh, this means they're going to serve 100 households. And somebody else could read it and think they're going to serve 2,000. They're not sure. And when they're not sure, they tend to score lower because vagueness can be interpreted in many different ways. And then finally, the community. So what is the community? Is it specific low income households that you're targeting? Is it a specific area, the R3 or an EJ community that you're targeting? Be really clear when you're working through your application, because you don't have a lot of space to give information. You don't want to put any statements that kind of don't advance your story. You always want to be making sure any statement that you make is giving really good, thoughtful information, because you don't want those merit reviewers to ever be left with questions. So when you are reading through your application, you've finished everything, you're ready to submit, I want you to think through these 4 questions and make sure that your application is answering all 4 of these. So it's answering your what, your how, your why, and your when. So what are the activities that will take place? How will this project benefit groups of people or communities, those you're trying to serve? Why is this project important for your community? Why is it needed? What is the impact it's going to have? And when will each of these activities take place? So again, that timeline, when is it going to happen? How long is it going to take? So I want to just take a second and talk about the budget template categories. So for those of you who've already looked at the budget template, these categories should seem familiar to you. So on that uniform budget template, there are 15 tabs along the bottom of that spreadsheet. And there is one tab for Phase 1, personnel, fringe benefits, equipment, supplies, contractual services, consultant services. Those are, again, repeated for Phase 2, so you can lay out each of those for Phase 1 or Phase 2, or both, if you're applying for both. And then the final 3 tabs are Phase 1 feasibility, Phase 2 site control, and then Phase 2 permitting. So again, here, if you're only applying for Phase 1, you only would need to do kind of that feasibility one. Phase 2 would be site control and permitting. So just make sure all of the tabs that you are going to ask for funding from the state, those are completed. So you just want to make sure you're completing this for the amount you are requesting from the state. So going back to that question we had a little bit earlier. So what we have here is basically a list of kind of common expenses. This is not comprehensive, but we wanted to just give you an idea of, if you had wages for a project manager or outreach staff, where would that go? In this instance, it's going to be personnel. If you have zoning or permitting costs, that's going to be in your Phase 2 permitting and interconnection costs. Your architect or energy auditor costs, that's going to be in your consultant. So this slide is really just meant to give you an idea of some common costs. Where might they end up on your budget? Now, if you do have questions and you're thinking through, I'm not really sure where this cost would go, what category it goes in, please feel free to reach out to us. So our email, and we'll talk about this a little later as well, is ceo.ceja, CEJA at illinois.gov. You also can always reach out to Aaron. As he said, his information is on the NOFO, so he can help with those questions as well. Now, something that is exceptionally important, and I want to kind of put a big light or flag on this one, is make sure to fill out your budget narrative. So not only is this a great place that you can give more information, tell your story more, but this is something that the merit reviewers are going to be looking at. And again, if there's not information in here, if you are making the merit reviewers assume, they're going to score you lower. Merit reviewers want to know, what is your plan? What have you thought about? Why did you choose this architect versus this architect? So make sure you're working through those details. You're outlining why the costs are the way that they are. even down to, if possible, showing your math. So show how you arrived at a certain number, how your why this architectural contract is the amount that it is. What is that company going to be doing for your project? And then also, you can collect quotes, you can collect invoices. Feel free to supply those as supplemental documents if you have them. Again, not required, but if you have them already, please go ahead and submit them. All right. And then before you submit your application, so before you upload everything onto the Smartsheet form and actually press submit, these are just some things to think through. So have someone unrelated to the project read your application. So again, this is going to help break those assumptions, because you're going to have someone who does not have knowledge of your project reading it and trying to get clarity of what you are trying to communicate. You can seek technical assistance from one of our CEJA program coaches who can help provide support as you create your application. Use the NOFO criteria on page 10 of the notice of funding as a guide for how you are writing your application. We're going to delve into that in a couple of minutes, but know that that is there on page 10. Double check all required documents are ready for submission. So this is something that will immediately have your application kicked back to you. If you submit your application and not all documents are ready for submission, so they're not completed, or you don't submit them, that will automatically stop you from going to merit review. So do not spend your time on an application and then don't actually submit everything to us. And then finally, only submit through that Smartsheet form. So you cannot email documents in. Aaron is very willing to help, but he cannot accept your application documents. We also cannot accept any sort of links. So if you try to send something through kind of a OneDrive link or a Google Cloud or something like that, those will not be opened. You have to submit all of your documentation through that Smartsheet form. Now, something that is really unique about these grant opportunities is that this is a rolling grant. So that means that applications are reviewed on a first come, first served basis. It also means there is no set deadline. So you just need to submit your application during this round 1 period, which started on March 5th and goes until July 1st. As long as you have your application in during that period, your application will be reviewed. And then again, it's going to be reviewed as you submit them. Decision letters will come out on a monthly basis. So you will know pretty quickly the decision on your application. Now, in the event that your application is denied, you can seek technical assistance, revise that technical assistance, or revise your application and then resubmit. So I think Aaron said earlier, and I just want to reiterate, there's no limit on the number of times you can apply for this. So if you don't make it the first time through, improve your application and resubmit that. All right, so any questions?
I will share. One question was, why does it state July 1st if there is no deadline and it's rolling?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's because we do rounds of applications. So there will be a round 2. So if you submit in round 1, let's say before July 1st, and then you get denied, there will be a round 2 that opens. So essentially, because this grant opportunity is going to kind of continue until that funding is exhausted, we set up these rounds so that if there's any changes to the NOFO that needs to happen, if there's any updates to the application, we can make those and re-release them for the next round. So it's rolling in the way that it will just kind of continue to go on, and there's no set date. But round one will not be the end of this opportunity. There will be a round two.
And I think also with that, just to throw out,
Mhm.
it's tied to the state budget, and then also the funding sources and things like that. So there has to be, it has to have some kind of end date, but then move into the next next fiscal year. We
Yeah.
do have another quick question about what is the earliest date to expect a decision on an application? Let's say that it was submitted in March.
Yeah, great question. So merit review will begin in April. So very likely the earliest date of decision will be in May. So we have provided about a 6-week timeline from the date it opened before the first merit review to make sure people had time to submit. And then we will start our merit review in April and then have those decisions out very likely within about 30 days of that first review. So look for it in May, I would say.
That's all the questions.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Erin. All right, so we are going to go through the merit review process. So we talked a little bit earlier that once you submit your application is going to be reviewed. So your applications are reviewed by what we call a merit review team. So these teams are dictated by GATA, which is the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act. It requires that all applications are scored by this independent team of reviewers. Those reviewers are experienced individuals, so they're individuals who are in a related industry. Maybe they are experienced in economic development and grant management, but they are external to the team that is managing this grant. And they are generally 3 to 4 people per grant or per merit review team. They are tasked with reviewing all of your application and supplemental documents, and then using a scoring rubric, the scoring criteria, which we'll talk about in just a moment. They're going to score each of your applications, and then their average score is going to be your application score. So as outlined in the NOFO, a kind of passing score, let's say, is 75. So your application has to hit 75 or above to move forward in the application process. So let me be very clear. If your application gets a 75, that does not automatically mean you get an award. It means you move forward in the process. There's still other steps you have to go through, negotiations, and then approval from DCEO. But it does mean that your application showed a good quality project and has been able to move forward towards that grant award. So this is what the merit review process looks like. So we're going to walk through each of these steps. So the first step is an administrative review. So this is simply verifying that all of the required documents were submitted. So again, make sure everything that is required is there. It also confirms eligibility. This is not a content review. So the administrative review is not looking through the quality of your project or rating your project in any way. It's simply ensuring all of the information that is there, that is required, is there. Now, if documents are missing, you will get a denial letter very quickly, just stating what is missing. You literally can resubmit that day if you want to. So if you have that document, you just forgot it, you can resubmit. So keep that in mind. Next up is that merit review and scoring. So like I said, those merit reviewers are going to look through all of your application documents. Applications are scored by each merit reviewer on 100% scale based on 4 criteria. You have to hit that 75% mark or above for your application to move forward. So those 4 criteria, and these are the NOFO criteria on page 10 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, are documentation of need, cost effectiveness, return on investment, applicant qualifications and capacity, and project quality. Now, the NOFO link has been placed in the chat, but also if you have the NOFO up already and you go to page 10, you are going to see a box that outlines all of those criteria areas. So on your screen right now, you can see the documentation of need area. Each of these is going to offer you a statement. So in this case, the project's location is within or serving equity investment eligible communities or underserved communities. What this statement is telling you what your application needs to demonstrate to get the highest number of points. So in this case, if your project's location is within or serving equity investment eligible communities, you know you're going to get points for that. If you're submitting your project and it is not within one of those communities or it is not serving one of those communities, you know you're not going to get points on that. So these are telling you your application has to meet this to get the maximum number of points. Now, each of these is a range, so don't be concerned that if, you can't fully articulate every single outcome detail, that's okay. You're still going to get points. Give us the information that you can give us. But these criteria are really meant to guide you as you're writing your application and tell you what's going to get you the highest number of points. So that's documentation of need. Each of these for the criteria, we're going to go through. So cost effectiveness and return on investment. You have your applicant qualifications and capacity. And then finally, project quality. So again, please use these criteria to help you as you're going through your application and think through, does my application meet these criteria? Is it explaining enough how we're going to utilize a community ownership model? Is it explaining enough how we're going to engage a clean energy workforce? So make sure to use those criteria. So now once the applications have been scored, all the merit reviewers will come together to do kind of a final debrief. And again, like I said earlier, their scores are averaged. The average of their score is your application's final score. So a score of 75 or above will move to that negotiation stage. A score 74 and below will receive a denial letter with the option to revise and resubmit. So if you do get that denial letter, you will receive a detailed denial letter. So it will tell you, based on the criteria in the NOFO, what areas you did not kind of provide enough information on, or the merit reviewers had questions on, and it will provide you direct examples. So that is meant to help you seek technical assistance, revise your application, and then resubmit your application if you choose to. You don't have to, of course, but we would hope that you would resubmit after revising it. Now, if you do meet that threshold, you are going to go to the next step, which is a negotiation meeting. So a negotiation meeting for DCEO is looking to discuss your project further. especially around areas where the merit reviewers may have said they needed more information. So it's pretty common for the merit reviewers to come back and say, you know, this is a great project, but I think that there needs to be more information about how they're going to engage the community. Or I think that, you know, this cost over here might need to be reevaluated to determine, you know, is this kind of the most cost efficient way to do this project? So these are pretty common questions. These meetings are a requirement of the process. So if that negotiation is positive and you as an applicant are able to kind of make adjustments or provide additional information, you'll move forward in that application process towards that grant award. So one thing that is really important to remember is that a negotiation invitation is not a guarantee of a grant award. So that is something that needs to be very, very clear. So just because you got a letter that states you're moving forward in the process, you passed the merit review, it's not a guarantee of a grant award. It just means you're moving forward in the process. So keep that in mind. It's still a positive. It's still something to celebrate. We will celebrate it with you. But just keep in mind that there's still a couple more steps before we officially sign any grant agreements. All right. So I know we are running a little over time. So let me just get through our support and resources because these are going to help you in your application process. And then we'll stay on a couple extra minutes for those who can to ask and answer any additional questions. So our first resources are budget and grant resources. If you are new to state grants, please utilize these resources. There are a ton of training videos and documents that can help you understand what you need to do to get ready to prepare for a state grant or what to expect once you submit your application. You also can ask questions. So if you have grant related questions, you can reach out to the DCEO help desk. So Abby has gone ahead and put that link in the chat for you to this DCEO grants page. If you need that resource, it is a great resource. And I know a lot of grantees and applicants get a lot of information from that page. We've also provided some partnership resources. So if you're looking for partners in your area, you can seek out these lists. So Illinois Shines keeps a list of equity eligible contractors. You can also seek out the Business Enterprise Program Directory. Again, if you're seeking partners, both of these are great resources. We've also provided some community solar resources. So like Erin said earlier, we have adopted the U.S. Department of Energy definition in kind of collaboration with the Illinois Shines community-driven community solar projects. So kind of those together are great resources for you to check out and utilize some information if you're still trying to build out your community solar project. And then here's some next steps. So watch the bidders conference. We mentioned that earlier. We have the recording and the slide deck available for you. Really take a read through the notice of funding. So read every single section, make sure you understand what this funding opportunity is really about, what it is, its mission is, what it is at its core, and then start working on your application. And while you are working on that application, make sure to reach out to technical assistance that we offer, as well as looking at the resources on that Community Solar Energy Sovereignty Notice of Funding website. We often will add new resources there to help as we get questions. We also have a Q&A page, so you can look at that, which is available on the site as well. If you are interested in that technical assistance from a CEJA program coach, so these are individuals who have been involved in kind of developing CEJA programs and developing this NOFO in particular, you can follow the link that is in your chat. You also can snap this QR code here if you want to just go ahead and sign up on your phone. It'll bring you over to a form, and then they will reach out to you to set up an appointment. I know I rushed through that a little bit because I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but are there any questions, Abby or Aaron, that I can answer before we sign off?
I was going through the chat. I think we've covered everything. Oh, one new message.
I'm seeing one from Letty, it looks like, asking about the email address.
Yeah.
So Letty, I hate to say this, but the email it's gonna come from is gonna depend. So it may come from me, or it may come from an OEBU staff member. Either way, the subject line is going to state the name of the grant, and then it will say application decision. So it'll say community solar energy sovereignty application decision. So it'll be very clear what that email is. And I say that it depends on the actual email address because I've been sending them out, but I know we are expanding capacity. So it may come from a member of the OEBU team. Either way, it will be very clear in the subject line what it is.
That's all the questions we had.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining. I know we went just a smidge over time, but I appreciate your engagement and your questions. And this will be posted very likely in the next 48 to 72 business hours. So please look at the NOFO web page. That's where this will be, along with all of these links to help you. Aaron said earlier, we are here to support you. We want to see these projects succeed. So please reach out to all of those resources and supports. They're there to really help your project grow and impact our communities and push us further towards that 100% renewable energy goal by 2050. So thank you again all so much for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you so much.